All of the economists, the most serious economists today who see the situation as it is, have already predicted the death of money. We are here at the end of an age that can be the beginning of another, or can be a total end of planetary life. And the only hope that remains for us is the transcendence of the ego and the rediscovery of the power of a kind of love that can bring about miracles. I think very few people understand the psychological repercussions that will ensue with the imminent death of the money god. And those who have not found the real God will be in chaos and maximum anxiety and lostness when all of their savings devoted to the worship of the false god have become worthless. And the real salvation has not been attained. It is of great historic importance when a god falls, particularly a planetary-wide god such as money. And its replacement will not be easy. Some think it's investing in gold. Others used to think it was oil, but now they've learned the hard way that that isn't the case. Some think that it will be resolved through bartering. But consciousness that has become entrained by capitalism and that seeks profit will have a very difficult time dealing with a situation in which the more that one seeks to gain, the more that one loses. Because the real God who will return after the death of money is the God of love. And only communities based on love and on trust and generosity and giving and sharing will be able to survive in that environment. An environment in which there will be no more need for lawyers or accountants or bankers or MBAs or any of the main professions that people now devote their lives to, which will become instantaneously meaningless, as well as all of the industries that are simply based on satisfying artificial desires that serve the god of money, that have inflated various values of art and music and medicines and various other artifacts far out of proportion to their real value. And once the real God is reinstalled on the throne of consciousness for all to recognize, then all of the values of the current civilization that worships money will dissolve, will vanish, will be seen for what they are, as delusions, as collective psychosis that we had bought into. And at that point, our souls will have to face our own alienation from the real God of love. And face that we were part of a system that worshipped false gods. And the god of money spawned many false gods, justified aggression and war and prejudice and racism, colonialism, and all of the various forms of control through intimidation that are ultimately based on the belief in money. And all of those mafias and other organizations based on the worship of this God, who have used intimidation and brute force in order to convert others to that religion, who would then pay their dues to the ministers of that God, will also lose their ground and their power. But as the real God returns, there will be many who will create imitation versions of that love. And we must become connoisseurs of love, who can recognize the real from its false, artificial versions. And understand that the real of love has nothing to do with egoic desire, has nothing to do with lust, has nothing to do with enjoyment. If anything, it has to do with sacrifice and surrender. And the realization that money as a god only survived because we mistakenly took the unit of consciousness as the ego. The ego and money are a pair that go together. But the ego itself as the ground and basis for belief in the God of money is also dying. And with the death of money will come the death of the ego. It is when the ego dies that love will be recognized as neither a property nor an attribute of any individual consciousness. But it is the release from the trance of belief in the individual consciousness and the recognition of the unity of all that is as a single whole, a single real that transcends all differentness. And that the only unit of consciousness that is real is the self that transcends and pervades the universe and brings wisdom and empowerment and love and joy to the hearts of all. That supreme power cannot be counterfeited. And in the dispersion and decomposition of the society based on the worship of the false gods, the only bond that will hold communities together is love. Love that creates the capacity to trust and to build a future based on a real present that is rooted in the eternal self, who unites us all. In meditation, we return to that real that overpowers all of the false gods, including the ego itself. And in surrender to that supreme real, the grace of that God is recognized as the only power that can take us through this time of tribulation that will follow the twilight of the idols, through the darkness of the end of Kali Yuga into the dawn of the next age. And to make it through this transition will require a consciousness that is already anchored in that truth that will bring the dawn of the next age, so that our inner compass is aligned with that power that will magnetically draw us through the darkness when we cannot see, and enable us to navigate the labyrinth of tribulations and adversities that we will have to confront, and that will give us the strength to pass through the time of the plagues and the faith to see the Red Sea open and the endurance to walk through the desert. And the even greater courage required to climb the holy mountain to receive the new commandments of the real God, and to melt down all the idols that we had worshipped, and be purified and prepared to enter the promised land of a new age that only that consciousness of the real can create. The capital of that God is not Jerusalem, nor Washington, nor Moscow. The capital of that God is the heart. And it is that capitalism that will bring us to Satyuga. We must be willing to reside in the heart. And those who have surrendered to the heart, that is not an individual's heart, but the heart of God itself, the heart of love that transcends all differentiations like gender and race and nationality and religion, and melts them all down into a unified field of supreme beauty that contains and integrates and loves all the manifestations created by that ultimate artist of phenomenal universes, of which we are both a creature and a co-creator. The great work of alchemy is to melt down the darkness of the ego and its false gods and find the true gold. That is the real economic system that we are meant to live under and with, the golden heart of love. But it is an opus magnum, as the alchemists knew, to melt down a hardened ego that had become cynical and hateful and disbelieving in the reality of love. And it is only when there is no choice, when everything else has fallen away that we had depended upon to build our lives on, that most of us will resort to the search for love. But in that dark night of the soul, when one can no longer sleep and the mind is obsessed with its own anxieties and traumas, and it has to face its alienation from the real, at that time only surrender to love will soothe our suffering. It is the only medicine. It is the only power that can reorganize us in a new way to make life even worth surviving and suffering the pains and the agonies of the death throes of a planet, and to be present at the creation of its new birth. We have found ourselves in this situation. We did not choose it. But we are here at the end of an age that can be the beginning of another, or can be a total end of planetary life. And the only hope that remains for us is the transcendence of the ego and the rediscovery of the power of a kind of love that can bring about miracles. a kind of love that is still sung about but treated as a cliche, a love supreme, a one heart, non-ordinary love. But are these only rhythms to share at an audible level, or can we hear the song of the heart and be the instrument of its cosmic music that can enable the world to vibrate at a new frequency that will bring about a new creation? If we vibrate at the frequency of the ego, with its traumas, with its hatreds and its cynicisms and its closed heart, we will not have the capacity to resonate with God. Meditation is the establishment of that resonance as the vibrational frequency of your body-mind in unison with that of the Supreme Being. And when the vibrational frequency of your mind and emotions and your physical organism are all attuned to that deep vibration of love, that will be recognized as redemption and as the ultimate protection that will create an energy field around the body, mind, and the community that will be its immune system against the chaos that will ensue with the transition from one age to the next. We have become used to recognizing through the hegemony of complexity theory in our sciences that this cosmos is one complex whole. And that complexity is such that it brings about emergent properties that cannot be predicted. But the ego mind depends on the past to strategize its approach to the future. And we are now in a time when the past is irrelevant to the future. Climate change makes completely unpredictable the correct processes of agriculture. And all of the other changes of such a massive nature that we are going through create a dancing landscape in which nothing can be taken for granted. And what is valuable today will be obsolete tomorrow. And what we thought useless will turn out to be a priceless instrument to enable our survival. And in order to know what is really going to serve us and what we should really let go of, to prepare for the changes that are approaching rapidly, we need to base ourselves on the eternal values that alone will survive and guide us through this transition, the chief of which is love. And it is love that will activate our wisdom and our willpower and our capacity to sacrifice and to endure and to care for our children and to raise them to be able to cope with these changes and be the founding members of the new age that is now being brought into being. And so if you're not willing to surrender to love for your own sake, do it for your children. And do it for all of the possible children who could be born if this world could again become livable and beautiful, and its ecosystem again healthy and filled with life forms that are able to survive, because the human stewards of that creation are again performing our duty. It is only through the act of meditation that we attune ourselves to one another at such a deep level of soul and spirit that we can be spontaneously in alignment with each other. In the same way that we see with birds and gnats swarming in the air, they never bang into each other. It is choreographed by a consciousness that is not individual. In the same way that the ant colonies act with such precision, without conflict. You don't see ants going on strike against the queen. You don't see any kind of conflicts in these social creatures, because the unit of consciousness is not the individual, but the whole. And we must again make our consciousness such that there will never again be conflicts or antagonisms, or envy, or greed, or aggression. And that can only be assured when our consciousness has become that of the whole. And the purpose of meditation is to achieve that oneness, not as a momentary experience to talk about later, but to live in, to establish ourselves as that unity that becomes so real that the false reality of the ego and its worship of money become ridiculous and an obvious waste of precious existence. It is only through the surrender of the mind and the heart to God in meditation that this truth becomes more than an intellectual concept, but a fact, a truth that cannot be denied. But that truth to be proved must carry on after one gets up from one's zafu and the formal meditation ends, and the realization comes that life itself is that meditation, that endless meditation of love. And that we see everyone we meet as an appearance of an aspect of our own consciousness, not as another, even though that being will have their own unique approach to reality from which we can learn and grow. And our duty is to grow through the appreciation of the values brought by those differentnesses that enable our consciousness to continually expand and deepen and recognize the self in every other, and which will be tested when we meet others from other dimensions and galaxies and other levels of reality than the ego even dares to contemplate. but we are entering a period of growth beyond what we thought possible. To recognize the real as something far beyond what science even begins to imagine. And that can only be approached when the limitations of our own paradigms of reality have stopped blocking us from the perception of those subtle realities that are already present in our space and are already having effects upon our environments and our minds and the conduct of governments, and are acting in ways that most of us are unaware of. But all of these forces are part of this greater consciousness and will be ruled at the source by the heart that is surrendered to love, not the mind that seeks control. That real God of love invites us all to be avatars of divine love. May we choose to accept that role that is offered and discover the power and the real richness that comes with serving the true God in this reality. And may our lives be an endless, blissful meditation that is the consummation of the ultimate love, which is union with that supreme self.